Your better life now. As most of you know, I have more than once made a reference to Joel Osteen's book called Your Best Life Now, probably a negative reference. Osteen is one of those so-called celebrity megachurch pastors who is more of a motivational speaker, and he's made it a point, he's admitted this, that to not mention sin in their church or repentance. And as I've said before, if this vaporous mist of life now is your best life, then your next life is hell itself. As many have pointed out, this life is the closest thing to heaven the non-believers will come, and it's the closest thing to hell that believers will go. One of the things that we saw in our previous series through the book of Hebrews, in the faith chapter, Hebrews 11, is that when Moses was faced with two options, he made the right choice. He had two alternatives. He had two choices, and he made the right one. Verse 25 says that his first choice was being mistreated, and the second choice was the pleasure of sin. And Moses, by faith, chose mistreatment. It says in verse 25, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Being mistreated with the people of God. Mistreated, but in a covenantal way. The two options that Moses had to choose from were actually between two promises. The promise of sin or the promise of God. He had to pick between those two promises, what sin promises and what God promises. Sin promised pleasure, but it was deceitfully temporary. It was fleeting pleasure. God promised eventual pleasures forevermore, for all eternity. So his real decision was between instant and temporary pleasure or later and eternal pleasure. His real choice was between instant gratification or lasting gratification. We have to realize that pleasure was not the problem. Pleasure is not the problem. Pleasure is not a bad thing. It's a gift of God. Psalm 16, verse 8 through 11, I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. I mean, just think about that verse itself. I have set the Lord always before me. I'm aware that I'm in his presence. I'm living my life, coram deo, in the presence of God. I've set the Lord always before me. I'm aware that he is everywhere. Because he's at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. When you really know that God is there, he's present. He's not a deistic God who's not involved. He's present, he's providential, he's sovereign. You will not be shaken. Verse 9, therefore, because I've set him always before me, therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, let your Holy One see corruption. Verse 11 says, you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So pleasure's not the problem. Sin promises pleasure, but it's fleeting, it's deceitful, it's temporary. It leads to pain forevermore. God promises pleasures forevermore, but we must go through some temporary pain first. Sin can only offer your best life now. The Puritan Thomas Watson said this. I've read this before, you might remember it. Whatever affliction or trouble a child of God meets with, it's all the hell he shall ever have. Whatever eclipse may be upon his name or estate, it is but a little cloud, which will soon be blown over, and then his hell is past. Death begins a wicked man's hell. Death ends a godly man's hell. Think with yourself, what is my affliction? It is but a temporary hell. Indeed, if all my hell is here on earth, it is but an easy hell. What is the cup of affliction compared to the cup of damnation? That's Thomas Watson. God, as it also says in Hebrews, disciplines those sons that he loves temporarily. No, he doesn't love them temporarily. The discipline is temporary. He loves them eternally, disciplines them temporarily. He offers on the other side of discipline the fullness of joy forevermore. I set the Lord always before me because he is at my right hand. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. We've been seeing in our series through Ecclesiastes called The Control Freak's Guide to Joy that life is uncontrollable and times and seasons are always changing. How many are experiencing change in your life right now? Probably most all of you. Things that you didn't want to change, things that did change, and you didn't necessarily see it happening. But that's what the book of Ecclesiastes is about. Life is a vapor, a mist that is often unknowable and uncontrollable. We might try to grasp it in our mind even. If I could just get what's happening and why it's happening, at least intellectually, then I can handle not being in control of it, because I can understand it. It's a mist, it's a vapor. Sometimes it's totally unknowable and it's uncontrollable. God is sovereign, we're not. In today's text, we're going to see that there are ways to have a better life now. I mean, life is out of our control sometimes. It's not to be grasped, but there is ways we can have a better life. In fact, the word in our text, better, is used, I think, like 7 times. It says better, better, better. It's a list of things that are better than other things. It's a list of things that are better than other things. And it's a strange list on the surface level because there are several things that you wouldn't normally say are better. Right? It's things that are better than this, other things. I heard an illustration of a lady who was at the airport and she had to wait like an hour for her plane to arrive. So she decided to get a bag of cookies and sit down and read her book. So she's eating her cookies and reading her book, and all of a sudden she notices a gentleman sitting next to her. He reaches over and grabs one of her cookies and eats it. She thought, well, that's weird. She just ignored it, and then a little bit later he reaches over and grabs another one, eats it. She said, what is this guy thinking? I can't believe this. So he does it a few times. Finally she said, if I wasn't a nice lady, I'd punch you in the face. And then goes back to her book. And then there's one cookie left in her bag, and he looks nervously and smiles and reaches in and grabs the last cookie, breaks it in half, and says, here, you can have half. She was so mad. Can't believe that. And then her plane was called, so she had to go on the plane. So she gets on the plane, she puts her luggage in the overhead compartment, and she gets her book out, and then sees in her purse her full bag of cookies right there. They were his cookies. They both had a bag of cookies. Come on, Lisa laughed at it when I told it to her. What's wrong with you people? I guess I did a better delivery with her. Sometimes, boy, that really bombed. I don't even know what to do with myself now. So anyways, who's the real thief, huh? Who's the real thief? She was taking all his. Things aren't always what they seem. God might have you going through some hard things, some very tough things, some drastic changes. And we, like the lady with the cookies, I shouldn't mention that anymore, may have the wrong perception of what's really going on, right, in our life. We may not know what God is doing with whatever change that's happening in our life or whatever trouble we're going through or affliction we have to endure. Sometimes the difficult things can be the greatest thing that happened to us. Sometimes the hard things might be the best thing that can happen. All those so-called tragedies are in reality triumphs disguised as tragedies, as Schlossberg says. My grandpa used to say, good, better, best. Never let it rest till the good is gooder and the better best. I don't know what that meant, but he said it. Now, I'm not sure, what he meant by that, but in life, sometimes you have to use wisdom. Sometimes everything's not black and white. You have to choose between the good or the better or the best. And sometimes that's not as simple as we would like. Solomon changes his style and method of writing in chapter 7. All of a sudden, he's doing a whole different style of writing, and he starts giving a list of proverbs. And he's saying through the proverbs that certain things are better than other things. Certain things are better than other things. Derek Kidner explains, with his sure touch, the author now brings in a stimulating change of style and approach. Instead of reflecting and arguing, he will bombard us with proverbs with their strong impact and varied angles of attack. The opening ones are provocatively cheerless. The rest, for the most part, provocatively cool and canny. That's Kidner. So with all that being said, let's have everybody stand in reverence for the reading from God's living, inspired, inerrant, and holy word. Ecclesiastes 7, verses 1 through 14. These are the words of God. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity, vapor. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Okay, it's got me all choked up with that bombed illustration. So let's start in verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. What does he mean by a good name? And why is it better than precious ointment? And what is the connection? When we think of a good name, we usually think of a good reputation, right? A good reputation. And that is part of what he's talking about. But the Hebrew word is more than just a good reputation. It's more than that. It is that, but it's more than that. Solomon said something very similar in the book of Proverbs. He said, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. What about the ointment, though? Why does he say a good name is better than ointment? In ancient Israel, they didn't have the advantages like we do of indoor plumbing and daily showers and baths. It didn't happen as much. There was a lot of dirt, a lot of walking, a lot of donkey rides, camel rides, and a lot of sweating, sandals, and stinky. Precious ointment was the Axe body spray or the Old Spice of ancient times. It was more like using cologne and perfume as a deodorant to cover up the smells rather than to prevent them. Sometimes the oil was precious because it was rare. It was spendy. It was rare. John 12, you know the story. It says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave him a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have it with you, but you do not always have me." It was an ointment. It was used. It was expensive. It was rare. And she was using it in actuality for prepare him for burial. So Solomon says in our text, if you want to live a better life now, even though it's vapor, even though it's out of your control, even though it's a mist, a good name is far better than smelling good for a while. Right? A good name is far better than smelling good. Who you are on the inside is of so much more value than what you put on the outside. That's the connection. It's what's inside that really matters. It's your character, not just your external reputation, but your character, who you are. A modern day version of this phrase is you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig, right? We all say that. The way Jesus put it to the Pharisees is in Matthew 23, 27, and 28. He said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." And as I implied earlier, a good name is more than just reputation. You can have a good, undeserved reputation and still have bad character, right? Michael Eaton put it really well. He said, in Israel, a name was no mere label, but intended to express an underlying nature. What is in view is not simply a good name, which may be undeserved, but a reputation which flows from character. It's talking about a reputation that comes from character. Character on the inside is far better than fragrance on the outside. So the second half of verse 1 is even more shocking. It says, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth." And the best way to understand that phrase, the day of death and the day of birth, is to read on in the text and see within the context what it's talking about, especially the next verse. What he was actually saying is that the day of death has more to teach us than the day of birth. As Philip Ryken put it, the main reason why the day of death is better than the day of birth is because, paradoxically, death has more to teach us about life. Has more to teach us about life. And we see this clearly when we read on in our text, verses 2 through 4. It is better to go to the house of mourning, the house of grieving, than to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. I always bring up this passage at funerals. I mean, I use this one every time because I think it's so powerful. So most of you probably heard me talk about this before. He's basically saying that if you want to live a better life now, it's better for you to go to a funeral than to a party. Why? Because funerals communicate more wisdom than festivals. We all know it's going to happen. We know it's on its way. We know that when it comes, we may regret that we didn't live as if we knew it was coming. This is why the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. The wise are not surprised. They're wise because they know that life is a vapor, it's a breath, a flower that comes and goes. Mourning a death of a loved one has a way of putting life into perspective and imparting wisdom. So don't act as if you're not going to be dead someday. Don't be surprised. I mean, you'll be dead, so you won't be surprised. We need to allow funerals to be a strong reminder to all of us about the priorities and trivialities of life in light of the shortness of life. We shouldn't waste opportunities to contemplate our own mortality. The house of mourning is a schoolhouse of learning. Back in the early 90s, a man named Stephen Covey wrote a self-help book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It helped a lot of people. The second habit of the 7 habits was begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. This habit emphasizes the importance of having a clear vision of what you want to achieve in life and aligning your actions with that vision. To begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your desired destination and then develop a plan or a strategy to reach that destination. But as we've seen in Ecclesiastes over and over again, life is often outside of our control. You might begin with the end in mind and still not find that success in this life. What we need to really do is begin with eternity in mind. Begin with eternity in mind. Not just the end of our life here and now, but our everlasting life forever and ever. And this is so hard to do because we are so distracted by all the things that are right in front of us here and now. We're so distracted by everything that's happening right now, all the stuff we have to go through, all the things that are right in front of our face. It's so hard to see past that into eternity and to begin with eternity in mind. One of the things that makes time so precious and valuable is how very little of it we have. It's short. Time is very precious because when it's past, it cannot be recovered. There are many things that we can possess that when we lose it, we might be able to get it back, but time is different than our possessions. We are control freaks, and we like to pretend that time is under our control. But the more we try to control it, the more we realize it's out of our grasp. It's short, life is short, unpredictable, fleeting, it's fickle. You can try to grab it tighter, but ultimately it's a mist, it's a vapor. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Ecclesiastes begins with vapor of vapors, says the preacher, vapor of vapors, all is vapor. Life is a repetitive cycle in some cases. There's nothing new under the sun, it's vaporous. As Myers says, everything is not meaningless, rather everything eludes our grasp and defies our attempts at comprehension and control. Everything is smoke, mist, vapor. He also says, in spite of life's vaporous nature, God can be trusted. God can be trusted. God and life can be enjoyed, despite the fact that life cannot be mastered, leveraged, or even fully comprehended by man. That's Myers. You cannot shepherd the wind like you can shepherd sheep. Only God is the true shepherd and in complete control, sovereign. None of us know how much time we have. None of us have a guarantee of tomorrow. It's uncertain. We don't know how much remains. We don't know if it's years or months or days or minutes. It's arrogant to take advantage of our time in life. None of us know how much we have. Each breath we breathe is a gift. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, "A grave, wherever found, preaches a short and pithy sermon to the soul. Sorrow is better than laughter." Oh, he's saying Papa. "Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." Sorrow is one of life's best teachers. Jesus said something similar. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." The poet Robert Browning Hamilton put it this way, I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she. But oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke. I thought I was going to read this thing. The next verse, we'll move on. Verse 5 and 6. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vapor, vanity. You want to live a better life now? Be open to rebuke, to wise rebuke. Be teachable, in other words. Or keep Spotify blaring in your headphones and only listen to the song of fools. None of us like criticism, right? None of us go up to somebody and say, can you just tear into me and just criticize me? Tell me all the stuff I do wrong. Come on, hit me. We don't want it. But it's better than the song and laughter of fools. It says there, for as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. You just imagine throwing thorns into a pot of fire, and it just burns real fast. It comes and goes. You have to put more in. But you listen to the rebuke of the wise, and that'll last a lifetime. That can change your life. Ian Provan says this, it is only the deeply lost fool who, in response to his folly, prefers sycophantic laughter to redemptive disapproval. Laughter in the midst of folly brings nothing to the situation other than noise. Rebuke brings the possibility of change. Be teachable, be open. Proverbs 9:8, do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Proverbs 15:31, the ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. Proverbs 17:10, a rebuke goes deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows into a fool. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard on this topic of criticism is from Charles Spurgeon. He says this, brother, if any man thinks ill of you, do not be angry with him, for you are worse than he thinks you to be. Don't get angry. You're way worse than he thinks. He says, if he charges you falsely on some point, yet be satisfied. For if he knew you better, he might change the accusation, and you would be no gainer by the correction. If you have your moral portrait painted and it's ugly, be satisfied. For it only needs a few blacker touches, and it would still be nearer the truth. That's great advice. Then it says in our text, if you want to live a better life, learn to wait patiently on the Lord. Verse 7, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Doug Wilson comments on that passage. He says, a wise man can lose his reason under oppression or be debased with a bribe. We might wish we could live in a world where wisdom was made out of stainless steel and could never degenerate, but we do not. Wisdom is required to see ends and beginnings. The proud spirit boasts at the beginning. The patient sees it through to the end. A man who puts on his armor should not boast like the man who takes it off. The adversity of seeing something through is far better than the pleasure of bragging about something before it's done. Again, verse 8, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. I was reading about a young man who was struggling with patience, and he asked his pastor to pray for him. He said, "Can you pray that I'll have more patience?" He said, "Yeah, we can do it right now." And so the pastor prays and says, "Lord, we just ask that you bring more trials and troubles and affliction into this young man." He goes, wait a minute, what are you doing? So this is how it comes. This is how you get it. James 1, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." King James says patience. "And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And I love verse 9 and 10 of our text. "Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these days? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this." Why were not the former days better than these days? We always want to go back to the good old days, right? And the good old days is really just a mixture of bad memory and a good imagination. We just want to go back to the way it was. Things change. Life is uncontrollable. And so we don't like that. We don't like that. Why can't we just be like it always was? Why do we have to go through this change? Why? Can't we just go back to the good old days? Remember the Israelites? They were in slavery, in bondage in Egypt, and the first thing they do is want to go back. They want to, where they had leeks and melons. We had it so good when we were slaves. So that's why he's saying this. He's been telling us that life is out of our control. It's going to change. We can't control it. Things are different. Don't say, let's just go back. Just leave it the way it was. God has you going through these changes for a reason. He's sovereign. We're not. We need to go through what we need to go through. And he knows, and he loves, and he's sovereign. I'll just close by reading the last few verses. Verses 11 through 14. Maybe I'll mention a little bit more about them next week. "Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is the wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked?" Who can make straight what he has made crooked? Is God making your life full of twists and turns? Who can make straight what he's made crooked? Verse 14, "In the day of prosperity, be joyful." Don't feel guilty about it. It's God. He's sovereign. If you're going through a day of prosperity, enjoy. And in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other. If you're going through prosperity or adversity, it's God. God has made them both. He's made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.